Apple finally announced the last chip in the M1 lineup, and now we're going to get the M2 chip. Yay! But do I really have to wait? For some reason on the internet, there's been a lot of excitement and hype for the M2 chip, and honestly, I'm really trying to figure out why. I'm just going to explain why you should not be waiting for this specific chip. Okay, so maybe there are some reasons why you might want to wait for M2, and it's just because currently you can't get the M1 in the product you're looking for at the moment. That's fairly reasonable, but you know what? There are some people who are just waiting for the M2 specifically, and I don't know why it's being overhyped like it is, so I'm going to kill that hype. Yeah, I know, I don't like doing this, but I'm just trying to make some reasonable sense and logic out of things. Why don't we just get into this M2 speculation? What exactly is the M2 chip going to be? It's going to be the obvious successor to the M1 chip. Now, the M1 has some pros and cons, and this might be another reason why some people are waiting for M2. Right now, the biggest pros with the M1 chip right now is it's stupid fast, especially for the market it's supposed to serve. It's supposed to serve mom when she's web browsing and when she's also financing and such. It's supposed to be for those people who use either a laptop or a desktop to do either their finance managing, their online shopping, maybe typing up a few Word documents. That's what this M1 chip is supposed to be for. And if you actually consider the performance of it, well, it's a little, maybe not a little overkill, maybe, I don't know, a lot overkill for what it is they're doing. If you're waiting on M2 for performance, don't. The M1 is already stupid performant for it. It's not performant enough for you, then you're not waiting for the M2. There's already a chip out for that. It's called the M1 Pro and the M1 Max and the M1 Ultra. And despite that this M1 chip has this stupid insane performance for your average consumer, it also has very stupid insane battery life, and that is something that the average consumer is definitely going to appreciate more in their MacBooks. The MacBook Air has currently 18 hours of battery life. No other laptop on the market has anything similar with a 100 watt-hour battery like that. Anything within that laptop's class, there is nothing else that can match that battery life. It is that impressive. The fact that it can actually have that good of a battery life and stupid overkill performance. But this M1 chip does have a few limitations to it as well, and I think that's just because, well, for the most part, Apple has had most experience in terms of making mobile chips, and this is their first time actually expanding into the desktop environment. So because of that, it has a few I/O limitations that they are slowly but surely, they're doing an okay job so far, actually being able to get the silicon to support more I/O bandwidth than what our current A15 or A12Z or something like that. Because of that, the port selection on the M1 is currently limited. Again, this can be mitigated with the M1 Pro and M1 Max and such and such. Again, with the M1, it's limited to a single display. Now, if you get the M1 Mac Mini, it doesn't have a single display. The M1 technically supports up to 2 displays. However, on the MacBooks and the new iMac, it only supports up to 1, and the reason for that is because, well, all those other computers have one built in, versus the Mac Mini, it doesn't have one built in, so you can technically support 2 displays with that. If you need more, then obviously the M1 is not for you, and you need a more powerful chip. Now, M2 is going to fix this I/O limitations that the M1 has right now, and that's just because M1 was Apple's first step into actually making desktop class chips, but for the most part, they've only had experience in really just making our mobile chips that, actually, I don't really know any mobile devices that have had more than 2 ports at a time. What do I mean more than 2 ports? It's like a charging port and a headphone jack. Now, for the most part, our mobile devices only have 1 port, but still, they had to adapt their technologies that they're used to from making just a single port design to, okay, now we need a much more connectivity bandwidth. They've obviously figured it out now, and so M2 is definitely going to fix these issues, but you should not be excited for M2 in terms of the performance thing, and here's the reason why. If you're looking for more performance than what the M1 currently has to offer, there's currently a chip out there that offers just that. It's called the M1 Pro and the M1 Max. Yes, if you're going to go desktop class, then the M1 Ultra, but once again, I'm going to stay closer to the M1 Pro, and this is because, well, the M1 and M2, these are supposed to be for the consumers. If you really need more connectivity, then the M1 Pro is basically going to be your friend. But when it comes to power, M2 is actually going to slot between M1 and M1 Pro. If you're looking for more power than what the M1 has to offer, even though I really don't understand why, because M1 is already overkill for most people. So if you really are looking for more power, then yeah, you're probably going to want either the M1 Pro at least. You know that the M1 is not going to be meant for you. And the same goes for M2. The M2 is supposed to be geared towards the regular consumer market who's mostly web browsing, writing a few Word documents, Pages documents, organizing photos, filing taxes with TurboTax. Apple has divided these chips that are geared towards completely different markets. The M1, it's basically providing overkill performance with awesome battery life for those people doing those things I just listed. The M1 Pro and M1 Max are designed to provide much more performance while still retaining that battery efficiency. And then the M1 Ultra is also supposed to deliver more performance while also being able to draw more power. It's a true desktop class chip. The M1 Pro and M1 Max are more geared towards laptops. The M1 Max has been fitted for the Mac Studio, and honestly, it's a good chip for the Mac Studio. That's a fine chip to use as the base model Mac Studio. But for those who are demanding more out of it, then there's the M1 Ultra. Apple is pretty much making different tiers of chips geared for specific products and for specific demographics of people. You want a basic computer for web browsing and such, you get the M1, and in the future, M2. But are you going to demand more performance out of it, like you're going to do heavy video editing or 3D animation, such and such like that, then you're probably going to want to go more towards our professional market. There's even two different divisions of the professional chip market. One for the laptops, because obviously you want battery efficiency in your laptops, and then one for desktops where you don't have to worry about a battery and can draw as much power as you want. But not only are there these hardware limitations, if you don't want to get the M1 right now because, well, maybe not everything runs on it perfectly fine, those performance issues aren't exactly really because of bad hardware. The reason why it might not perform as well is primarily because of software. This is a new architecture for a lot of these desktop class programs. Most of them have been fitted for x86. I mean, there have been some that have been made for ARM due to Windows on ARM and such. We all know how terrible that has gone. Seriously, do not even consider getting any ARM processor for a Windows device. It is not good at all. Meanwhile, because Mac is such a popular platform, it's not as popular as Windows is per se, because it's a popular platform that many people choose, a lot of developers have already gotten on the train of, okay, yeah, we need to start optimizing our apps. But because Macs aren't as popular as the, what's that percentage? I don't even remember, but it is a very big percentage. Windows, obviously Windows is mostly optimized for x86. A lot of developers don't want to take the time to actually optimize that. Is it really worth waiting for the M2? Honestly, the M1 is fine for most people if you're doing these basic things. And if you're either looking for more power or more connectivity, Apple's made these chips. The only reason why I'd say you might not want to buy these right now is because maybe they're just not in the proper form factor you're looking for. The M1, in terms of the laptops they're currently offered in, the MacBook Air, there's only 2 ports available, and maybe you don't like the fact that there's 2 ports available. The 13-inch MacBook Pro, maybe it's not a true MacBook Pro like we all definitely know it is not a true MacBook Pro. Why do they still sell that thing? I don't understand why they still sell this low-end 13-inch MacBook Pro. It makes no sense in the lineup whatsoever. And even then, that MacBook Pro also only has 2 USB-C ports. Maybe the higher-end Pro actual MacBook Pros, maybe they're just a little too expensive and you don't want to spend that much money for all of these features. Because I mean, the current M1 MacBooks, honestly, in terms of what they are an awesome value, but maybe you don't want to spend, I don't know, like another $1,000 just to get a better chip with better connectivity and more performance. So maybe you're just waiting on different form factors. Maybe the current iMac right now isn't fitting your needs, or the current lower end MacBooks aren't fitting your needs. Okay, that might be the reason why you might want to wait for M2. But if you're waiting for the M2 just because of the chip itself and not necessarily the computers they're going to ship in, honestly, don't wait for M2. The M1 is already overkill for most people, and despite that it has these I/O limitations, as this is their first attempt at making a desktop class chip, for the most part, it's fine. You get 2 Thunderbolt ports max and 2 USB 3 style. It'll either come in the form of either 2 USB-A's or 2 USB-C's, depending on what Mac you buy. And this is the desktop class I'm talking about. Honestly, the M1 is fine for most people, even despite that it has some I/O limitations. I did not get it because, unlike most people, I actually plug a lot of stuff into my computers at one time. Obviously, M1's not going to cut it for me, but do not wait for M2. If you're waiting for M2 in terms of a performance standpoint, you're not going to be impressed. Alright, thank you for watching. Do me a favor and interact with the stuff below. My name is DeWolf, Random Alpha, signing out.